One of the other big items, I have a significant number of female listeners, and they were paying attention to all the reports of what was taking place during the French Open with the gorgeous and talented Venus Williams, and I guess the tennis outfit that she was wearing and the undergarments that matched her skin tone, and I guess for some people it looked like she wasn't wearing anything under her tennis outfit. Are you familiar with what I'm speaking about?
Yes, I'm somewhat familiar.
Okay. I guess they wanted your take. I know some of my female listeners, they felt that wasn't appropriate in a system of white supremacy. You wouldn't want to see a black female dressed that way in front of a lot of white people who suspect could be racist.
Well, you see, from my vantage point, it's not just Venus Williams. I was parked my car in the parking lot going to the drugstore the other day, and I saw a woman whose clothing were cut so low she might as well not have had a top on. Do you see? So that the way that many people are dressing, and from my vantage point, not giving a lot of thought to exactly, well, how do I look or how does this fit? Might put it in the category of young men walking around with their pants below their buttocks. Do you see? I consider that to be inappropriate dress. And it is tied to what people are experiencing and what people are thinking about themselves. It's almost as though the more that black men are removed from the community, either in prison or in drugs, or now some of the data indicates the increased number of black males who are focusing on white females, then the more black females are, not everybody of course, but some people are undressing so as to attract attention. And they may not be thinking about it in the framework that I'm thinking about it, but I would say that people very often are doing things because they see somebody else doing it. But they are not focusing, that's sort of focusing on the micro, but not focusing on the total context as a whole in terms of what the system, the power dynamic of racism, white supremacy, is like a broad circle around all of the different things that are occurring within that circle. And so within that circle, black men are being systematically removed from the community. The increasing numbers of black males who are incarcerated, the number of people who are addicted to drugs, the number of people who are just dropping out in one way or another, that is directly related to the war in the system of white supremacy against black people in general and black males in particular. Do you see? So that there is an attempt to attract the few, if I can say it that way, the few remaining males that are in the community, just in the same way my interpretation. And there might be some of your listeners who would not agree. But again, within the contextual frame of the system of racism, white supremacy, when young men are walking with their pants down below their buttocks, it's like a subconscious invitation for homosexual activity or male infusion. And I would relate that directly to the high percentage of absence of fathers in the home. It's like I feel a need for male substance at a subconscious level. And so I drop my pants, just as though I was looking for a homosexual relationship or male substance going into my rectum. And I'm sure people are not consciously thinking about it, but all behavior has meaning. And you only are able to draw, well, what is the meaning when you are familiar with the context in which the behavior is taking place. Someone was describing to me today the way that they saw some young black males dressing in the city of Baltimore, Maryland, and that they were wearing short shorts that looked like a skirt and a halter top. You see, because masculinity is being extracted. Again, it won't be understood unless you understand the system of racism, white supremacy is about white genetic survival by any and all means necessary, consciously and subconsciously determined. And so if a community is fearful of its genetic annihilation, then it has to attack the males that it is afraid of. The condition of skin whiteness is a genetic recessive trait. The ability to produce melanin skin pigment is a genetically dominant trait. And so black people have the greatest genetic potential to produce the black pigment melanin that colors our skin. And I maintain that racism is about the fear of white genetic annihilation, which makes the black male be perceived as the number one enemy, the number one threat, not of gun violence, the number one threat of white genetic annihilation, which is why after formal slavery, large numbers of black men were lynched and castrated. And the accusation was that they wanted to have sexual relations with white females, or they spoke to a white female, or they thought they wanted to thinking about a white female. And so the retaliation and the response on the part of the white collective and white men, but also, people who trouble themselves to read the history. There's an important book, Without Sanctuary, where there's a pictographic as well as a discussion of all of the lynchings of black men that took place, primarily in the southern states, but not always in the southern states. And you have large groups of white men, white women, and children smiling, standing around and smiling on the destruction, hanging, and burning often, castration of black men. And so that was the symbolic act. In other words, if I'm afraid black men can cause white genetic annihilation, then what do? I cut off the black man's genitalia. And we see, what shall I say, we can see that it's sort of in microcosm, when white police officers stop black men and force them out of the cars and start patting them down and grabbing their genitals. That goes on to this day. And so, again, nothing makes sense unless it is in context. And I say that the most important thing for black people, we're moving towards the end of the first decade in the 21st century, the most important thing for black people is to begin to be serious and begin to be knowledgeable about the system of racism, white supremacy. As Neely Fuller has said, if you do not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. And that's why black people greet each other by saying, hey, what's happening, what's happening, what's happening. That is uttered 1,000,000 times, trillion times every day amongst black people. Hey, what's happening? The indication being is that I really don't know what's going on, even though I'm not consciously thinking that. But anybody who has to keep asking, hey, what's happening, what's happening? And it's very clear in terms of our functioning as a collectivity of people that we do not understand what's going on. It would be just like me, Frances Welsing, standing on a football field who doesn't understand the nuances of the game of football. And so I'm standing there wondering why the ball is passing by and why the other people are running into each other, and somebody might run into me and knock me down because I don't really know what moves to make. That's us in the context of, that's us functioning, or shall I say being dysfunctional, in this system that we have been deceived and told that it is a system of democracy with imperfections. Well, no, it's not a system of democracy with imperfections. It is a perfected system of racism, white supremacy. And as long as we don't understand that, then we will be dysfunctional as a people. It's like the Semites of the Jewish religion in Germany and other countries in Europe when Adolf Hitler came to power. Hitler said that the Semites of the Jewish religion were not white people, and he did not want the Europeans genetically contaminated by people who he classified as non-white. Those were gypsies. They were black people who were in Europe and in Germany, and the Semites of the Jewish religion. And so Hitler and his organization systematically sat down at conferences and planned to kill 11 million. Well, the Semites of the Jewish religion considered themselves to be Europeans and Germans, and they wanted to be assimilated and accepted as Germans. Well, the word German meant white. Just like the word British means white, Scandinavian means white. The word American means white, which is why we black people, I call myself black, but many black people call themselves a hyphenated American. White people don't call themselves Euro-Americans. They call themselves Americans. So other people are Hispanic, people who are non-white. Hispanic, Asian, Afro, America. The hyphenated American is really not an American. American means white. And as long as we don't understand the dynamics of the system of racism, we are functioning like we have IQs, the average IQ of 60, 50, you see, which is not a passing IQ. But this is not to ridicule us, because this has been a deliberate deception. In other words, the global white minority organized racism as a defense and protective system to prevent their genetic annihilation on the planet. And if that is understood, it wouldn't be expected that they would, it would be a just thing if they came out and said to the non-white global majority, this is what we're doing on the planet. But you don't reveal your defense any more than if you sat down at a chessboard. The white side of the chessboard that plays offense defense doesn't announce the game that it's going to play against its opponent. It's up to the opponent to figure that out. It's just like in a football game or a basketball game. One team does not sit down and say to the other team, now these are the moves that I'm going to be making against you. They don't do that. The opposing team has to study past games or study the history of the coach, study the history of the players, examine in detail the kinds of plays that have been made in the past so that they can anticipate what to expect in the present. See, now that's thinking. And we have been, since our enslavement, we have been encouraged to emote. You see, somebody turns on a program such as The Price is Right. And when they call a black person to come up and be a contestant, the black person is jumping up and down, falling all over the floor, just being behaviorally out of control. But that's considered normal. All of that emoting, because that's all we could have done for hundreds of years about our enslavement, because we were not able, being beaten and killed and raped and mutilated and worked to death. It's like, all we could do was emote, or most of what we could do was emote. And the system of racism, white supremacy, has attempted to keep us in that mode. And so it's not about, I would encourage every black person, forget about hating white people. It's not about hating. What we have to do is to understand the situation that they find themselves in on the planet and what they have decided to do in terms of protecting their interest. You see, whether it's psychological warfare, chemical warfare, that's crack, cocaine, marijuana, and everything that it's laced with, biological warfare, HIV, AIDS, Ebola, and any other thing that they attempt to produce in the laboratories that they have set up to make biological warfare weapons, or to make ethno-specific biological weapons. So understanding that it's no time, it's a waste of energy to spend hating white people. Now, I would wish, I said in the paper that I wrote in 1970, the Cress theory of color confrontation and racism. I said the challenge for white behavioral scientists is to help white people become comfortable with their minority status and their genetic recessive status on the planet. In other words, have insight into their own behavior, because it's only if they have conscious insight do they have the possibility of behaving differently than they are behaving. But you have a lot of people who classify themselves as white who do a lot of talking about anti-racism and whiteness theory or whatever. But they don't talk about what the core motivation is, because they are reluctant to say, we are a tiny minority. We're not anybody's majority. We are a tiny minority on the planet. The overwhelming majority of people are black, brown, red, and yellow. And we are genetic recessive. White skin is not genetically superior. It is a mutation from black people. And it's a genetic recessive mutation. And so our motivation is to survive as a global white minority that is genetic recessive. They don't say that. And so it's as though they just talk about, some white people do this and white people do that. But unless you get down to the core and have a discussion at the core level about the motivation of people, you're not being honest. You're pretending that you're interested in ending racism, but you're just doing, playing the liberal game of talking a good game, but then when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, you really are not replacing the system of racism and white supremacy with a system of justice.
Wow.
Well, I've rattled on. Maybe you have.
Not at all. I was just listening attentively and taking notes, and I'm sure listeners were as well. I mean, shared so much. I wanted to kind of go back and pick out a few things, because you talked about